All right, welcome to the Productivity Show. This is episode number 300. This is our 300th episode live Q&A spectacular. My name is Brooks. I'm the operations director at Asian Efficiency, and I'd like to welcome the co-host of the Productivity Show, Tan.
Hey everyone, this is Tan Pham, founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And 300 episodes later, we are here. Took us about, is it 5 years now? I think it's 5 years. I have no idea how long this thing has been going on. I just show up every week and somehow just gets out in the world somehow.
All I know is I was the second guest on the Productivity Show, I believe, back in episode either number 7 or number 6. I was the very second guest. So it's funny, I've been around since the beginning, but now you guys are stuck with me every week. Whether that's good or bad for you, you guys can decide. So this is going to be a very different episode than what we normally do. Normally we center it around a specific topic and we go through and we give some training on that topic and have a discussion on the topic. Today, because it's our 300th episode, we're turning it over to you. And this is going to be a Q&A episode. So we have a bunch of questions that are pre-submitted, which is great. We also are recording this live in front of the Asian Efficiency audience. So we invited our readers, our podcast listeners, social media followers to come on the podcast. So we're recording live as well. So you're going to have some questions coming in from the chat. And also we may even have some people coming in live and joining us as well. So the way we want to start this, or the way we always start these episodes, I should say, is that we want to always start giving you something of value that you can take right away. So we are going to do what we call our top 3 resources. So these are 3 things that we're loving right now or that are making us more productive or people in the team are using right now. So I added these 3, so I'll just take it right away, Tam, if you don't mind. So our top 3 resources, number 1 is a tool which we've talked about on the Productivity Show before. It's called You Need a Budget, or YNAB. I know a lot of us with the COVID-19 stuff, the quarantine stuff, a lot of us are paying extra attention to our finances. So YNAB is a tool I've used for years and years and years and years and years. And it's really helped me stay on track and make sure that at least my family were living within our means and growing. That's number 1. Number 2 is a tool called Grammarly, and full disclosure, they've sponsored the Productivity Show in the past. They're not specifically sponsoring this episode, but it's a tool that I know we all internally use at Asian Efficiency. And I bring it up because one of our members in the dojo was asking for recommendations on hiring an editor, and he found that just using Grammarly did everything for him that he needed. Not to say Grammarly is a total replacement for a live editor. There's some cases where you definitely want that, but for many cases, a tool like Grammarly will do. And the third one is a book. It's called 5 by Dan Zadra. It's a book I read a while ago while I was staying in a cabin with no internet access. So I had nothing else to do except read books. And it's basically a book that takes you through where you want to be in 5 years. And it has a bunch of exercises and really thought-provoking ones that my wife and I talked about as well. So those are our top 3 resources. So Tan, maybe you can start us off. What are we looking to do with this episode?
Yeah, so today's number 300. And when we first started the Productivity Show, I honestly didn't think we would make it this far. So I'm super proud that we made it this far and that we continue to put out great content to help all of you listeners here to be more productive and get the stuff done you need to get done in the limited amount of time that you have. And we also are running a survey. So if you go to theproductivityshow.com/survey, we would love to hear your feedback on how we can make things better, how we can improve the stuff that we do at Asian Efficiency and on the Productivity Show, and also learn a little bit more about you so we can tailor our content and production for what you need. So if you go to theproductivityshow.com/survey, we would love to hear from you. And we have some questions that people have submitted before we went live, and we also have a live audience here that are going to ask questions. And so normally we would talk a lot about productivity, which we would continue to do so, but we also have a lot of questions about how Asian Efficiency works, what happens behind the scenes, and we thought it would be fun to kind of give you an idea of what actually happens, behind the scenes, what actually happens at Agent Efficiency when we're not live on a podcast or teaching a course or doing other things. And so we're going to open up the kimono and just allow you in. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to post them in the chat here for those who are listening live. But Brooks, let's just dive into the questions, shall we?
Yeah, let's go. So as I mentioned, we've had a bunch of pre-submitted questions. I will say that I took some artistic license when I put together the questions because we wanted to keep it really succinct, like I said, for the podcast. So in some cases, I combined questions that people asked. Some cases, I kind of shortened them down. And also in some questions, we've had a number of questions that are actually answered by another podcast episode that we've done recently. So what I'm going to do, just so you know, is when you go to the productivityshow.com/300, which is our show notes, what I'm going to do is the questions that we aren't answering live, but are answered by, say, a recent podcast episode or something like that, I'm going to have a list in the show notes of those, so you can go straight there for those. But for the ones we are going to cover live on the podcast, we'll get started. And I'm going to, since I'm the co-host, I'm going to take the first question myself. Because Tan, you already mentioned that you didn't think that, or maybe you hadn't really thought of it, that we would make it to 300 episodes. I'm just curious, what was your initial thought of how long the podcast would last? And then number two, doing the podcast for 5 years, how has that helped you with your productivity, if at all?
So many people who have been listening to the show for a long time might have heard this story that I've mentioned maybe one or two times. But for those who are new, the productivity show or the podcast was actually never meant to be started. I was actually always against starting the podcast because as Agent Efficiency was growing, we started to lose focus. We started to do like so many different things, right? We had like a conference that we wanted to do. We had a podcast. We wanted to do live workshops. We wanted to build different courses. We wanted to focus on advertising. There was just so many things we wanted to do. And we lost kind of focus over time where we had to kind of like start narrowing down what we really needed to do, right? And so it's just this, we were drowning in opportunity and we had to say, okay, guys, we can only focus on 1, 2, 3 things at most. And the podcast is just not part of that journey right now. And so I made that decision, and Zach and Mike at that time, they basically kept, convincing me and just bringing it up on meetings saying, Tan, we need to start a podcast, right? And so they just kept doing this over and over and over again over a span of I want to say like 6 or 8 months. And eventually I just caved in because I said, you know what, if I want to keep Zach and Mike happy, then they can just run the podcast, as long as I'm not involved, they just run it kind of like in their own time. Then we can kind of run it as like a fun, passion project on the side. But we still have to do all this other stuff that, we agreed to do as a company. So they were super excited. They started the podcast, they started to launch it. And it just became a huge success, and I had no clue that it would be this big today because we are, according to our download numbers and also the feedback that we get, the biggest productivity podcast out there. And we just surpassed like 8 million downloads in the last 4 or 5 years. And so it's been this huge success that I never envisioned, right? We just took the approach and we said, hey, let's just launch this thing. Let's just do 1 episode a week, keep it really consistent, and we'll just see where it goes, right? And when we made it to 100, I said, wow, okay, this is pretty nice. The podcast is losing a lot of money, but this is kind of a cool thing, right? And so we had to eventually figure out, okay, how do we invest all this time into making it better, but also how do we make it so that it's kind of like a part of our marketing strategy as well, and also a way for us to keep the lights on. Right. And one of the things we always talk about is like, what are some of the things that keep the lights on, KLO? And so the podcast, as you might have seen, started to get sponsorships, which kind of help pay for the editors and people behind the scenes who produce a podcast. Because what a lot of people don't know, there's actually multiple people behind the scenes that are involved with producing a podcast episode. And to put that in perspective, every episode costs about $1,000 to put together. So even though you see me and Brooks kind of like as the faces here, there's a lot of other stuff that happens behind the scenes. There's a lot of people who put the notes together, do a lot of research for us. There's people who do the editing, that put the graphics together and everything. So there's this whole production team behind it. And Brooks and I are just kind of like the faces of it. Yeah, it's one to first and foremost congratulate everyone on the team to produce this fantastic episode and podcast that we have. And like I said, I just never thought we would go that far.
Well, Andy V in the chat says he definitely came into the dojo, our productivity community, because of the podcast. And I know for a fact he's not the only one, because when we would have things like meetups in Austin and stuff like that, chatting to people, almost all of them mentioned the podcast. So yeah, that's great. It's been a great success from that perspective. Recently, we did an episode about the COVID pandemic. I think it was TPS 241.5, which is just one we busted out in this one day. And I edited that one, and I have definitely a new respect and appreciation for our podcast editor. That's for sure. All right, question number 2. This is a kind of a combination of questions from Virginie and D and John M. And the question is, how do you win the fight against start of the day inertia? Like, what motivates you to be Asian efficiency every morning when you wake up?
This is going to sound really funny, but just following a morning ritual is the way to go. When I follow my morning ritual, it just puts me into a certain state. It puts me in a certain focus, and then everything just kind of goes from there. Because part of my morning ritual is getting ready for the day. It is looking at my goals. It is making sure that what I'm doing that day is going to be purposeful. It's going to be important. It's going to be productive. If I just do that, following the morning ritual, everything else just falls in place. And if I don't follow my morning ritual, then everything usually falls apart because I'm not as focused. I just tend to do things that kind of come on my plate. And so following the morning ritual, I think, is the most important thing for me to stay productive, to stay focused, to stay motivated, to kind of like fight against that start of the day inertia, because I've been on the other side too, where you just start your day with no clue what to do. You just kind of show up for work, right? And then other people will tell you what you need to do, and you open up your email accounts and other people are saying, hey, can you do this for me? And you start to do all these different things. And then by the end of the day, you just go home. You're like, oh, I kind of had a productive day. But then when you really think about it, did you really have any time to work on yourself? Did you have any time to work on your personal goals or your career goals? And oftentimes you don't, right? And so just having that intention at the start of the day, I think, is really important. And that's why I think the morning ritual is one of the most important things that people can first implement.
Yeah, I'm the same way when I get up, and I have that ritual of going for my walk and doing my reading, and then doing my journaling. Just that ritual is what kind of gets me in the space. I also do want to throw a shout out though to Scrum, which is the methodology we use at AE. So there's never any doubt when any of us start the day what needs to be done, because we have a sprint, we have things we're working on. So it's always very clear, having the sprint and having the daily huddle. It's always very clear what there is to do. So there's never any day where any of us gets up and just isn't sure what to do for the day. And part of that is the morning ritual, but part of it is also having a framework that we follow. Okay, the next question I'm going to ask is, when we talked about doing a Q&A episode, I mentioned to Tan that there is going to be, I 100% guarantee this is going to be one of the first questions that get asked. And since you brought up Mike and Zach, I have a 3-part question for you. Question number 1, what happened to Aaron? So Aaron, for those who don't know, is one of the co-founders of Asian Efficiency. And then part 2 and 3 is what happened to Zach and what happened to Mike. And so those are all questions that came up right away, which was note about that. So maybe we've had, I'll drop in the show notes, we've had episodes with Zach and Mike where we kind of talked about their time with Asian Efficiency. They all recorded those, so I'll drop those in. But just at a high level, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so Asian Efficiency started back in 2011, January 1st, 2011. So it's almost been 10 years now. And I started this with one of my friends at the time, Aaron. And we just started blogging about what it takes to be really Asian efficient. as we like to say, to be really productive. And it just started off as a blog, and we were just, kind of sharing our ideas and best practices. And we just happened to meet at a conference at a time. And it turned out that we had a lot of mutual friends, and we just became friends and stayed in touch that way. And then we started a blog together, asianefficiency.com. And so we were just kind of sharing our ideas, and it just kind of took off after a while, after 6 or 7 months. And so it was never meant to be a business, honestly, for people that are joining recently. Asian efficiency was never meant to be a business. It was always a passion project. We just happened to turn it into a business because we had so many people asking us, like, hey, can we hire you for coaching? Could you be a consultant for us? Hey, do you have a course, or do you have a workshop that I can attend? Because I love your content. And so we decided, hey, maybe we should turn this into a business, right? And so from 2012 and onwards, it became a business. And so Aaron and I were working together every day, working and growing this business. And then around late 2015, Aaron decided to pursue another venture. So he ended up working at a big company in Australia that his parents owned. So he kind of took that. He also was involved with another startup, an e-commerce business. And I believe now he is back into blogging again. So if you go to aaronlin.me, you can follow his work there as well. We talks about productivity as well, and some of the ideas he has learned since then. So he's been kind of becoming more of a blogger and a writer and a thought leader now. When it comes to Zach joined us, I believe, in 2014 or so. And his whole thing was coaching and being the face of the company. And then he was, involved, as many of you know, with starting the podcast. He was a big proponent of doing that, and he did a lot of the coaching as well. And then I think he left around 2016 or so. It was a little bit after Aaron left. And then he wanted to start his own business because he was about to get married, or he was going to get married at some point and then have kids. And he said, hey, this is a unique window, an opportunity for me to start a business and see how it goes before I have kids and kind of settle down. And so he said, hey, Tan, I'm going to start my own productivity business. And so he kind of did that for a while. And I believe nowadays he works for an education company, or a tech education company, where he's helping people onboard and consult them on how to use their software. And then when it comes to Mike is now an editorial editor, I believe, at the Sweet Setup. So many of you know that website where they review Mac products and apps and stuff. And he works with Sean Blanc, who many of you know as well. And so, Zach and Mike were the ones who started the podcast. And Mike was a big content producer at Asian Efficiency. He was involved with a lot of the products, and has been driven a lot of new innovation and stuff that we did at the company. And I'm always, thankful for everything that they've done for growing the podcast, because without them, honestly, we wouldn't be at 300 without their thought leadership, their contents, the things that they produce. Honestly, we wouldn't be here today without them.
Great answer. And I kind of follow them all, and they're all doing different things, but all doing great things. All right, so next question is from John W. And it is, what apps do you have, you being us, what apps do we have on our home screens? So I thought it would be fun to tackle that one. So for the people listening live in the chat, I'm going to drop some images of Tan and my screens. And then for those listening at home, if you go to the productivityshow.com/300, you'll see these screenshots as well. But yeah, Tan, maybe you can just start highlighting a few of the apps. I don't think you have to read the whole list, but maybe a few apps that are on your home screen.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to do this live, so I'm doing this impromptu. But shortcuts, it comes with default with your iOS system, right? So I have an iPhone. This is the iPhone 10. And I love shortcuts because I have a lot of automations on my phone. So if you join the Automation Academy, which is our course on how to automate repetitive tasks to free up 5 hours a week, you've probably seen that we have a lot of automations in there. And one of them is about shortcuts. So I love that. The other one I really like is Latch. So this is mostly because my building has this automated key system now. So I don't have any physical keys anymore. They use like an automated system now. So that's the one I really love. Calm, that's the meditation I like to use. So I have a daily calm for 10 minutes. That's one I like to use every day. And then let's see, with the whole pandemic, I've been using a lot of Uber Eats. So if you ever need a good coupon code, just message me because I order so much there that they always send me coupon codes. So if you need something, I'm your guy. Let's see, Overcast for podcasts. So that's the app I like to use. Audible for audiobooks. And then the last one I will mention here is Carrots. So Carrots is my favorite weather app. And you're going to laugh at me because it costs $5, but it's the most accurate weather app that I've ever seen. And I forgot the name of the server that they use, but Apple recently bought I think it's called Dark Skynet or something like that.
Yeah, I think Dark Sky. Yeah.
Or Dark Sky. So that's the data servers that they use for like predicting the weather and stuff. And I was really reluctant to buy this app until my friend Scott told me about it. And I remember I was at a clothing store one day, and as I was about to walk out of the store with my new purchases, it started to rain. And I said, oh my gosh, like now I have to wait, you know? And so I pulled up the Carrot app and it said, hey, the rain is about to stop in about 16 minutes. I was like, wow, that is very accurate. So I literally set a timer and said, okay, let's see how accurate this is, right? And around the 15-minute mark, guess what? It stopped raining. And ever since then, I was like, okay, this is the only weather app I'm going to use going forward because it was so spot on. And so it can, show you the weather conditions per hour. And also anytime it rains, it will tell you when it stops raining. I'm just like, wow, this is perfect.
All right, for me, so I have a lot of the same apps. Fantastical for my calendar. I have YNAB on my home screen because when I spend cash, I like to record it there. MindNode, which is a mind mapping app. That's the one I use. So a lot of times if I'm reading a book and I don't have my iPad handy, I'll take some notes using MindNode. And I have Sonos because I'm a big Sonos user. Our house is all wired up in Sonos. I have Calm as well, and I have a news section which has the Economist Espresso, which is kind of a short form daily thing from the Economist magazine, New York Times Morning Briefing, and Reader, Reeder, which is an RSS reader. I'm one of those people who still reads things through RSS sometimes. And those are and Audible too, because I listen to audiobooks exclusively while I'm driving. But you can see all of our apps in the show notes at theproductivityshow.com/300. All right, so next question is from Torsten, who I see is live here. So hey, Torsten. And his question is, how do you join AE as an employee? Let's say somebody wants to join Agent Efficiency. How do you go about doing it? I'll tell you my strategy, which was stock tan at conferences for about 5 years, and then go to sushi dinner with him. So that is one approach if you want to play the long game. But from the employer's perspective, if somebody's really likes what we do, how would they go about joining the team?
I have a really funny story about that we should definitely share. But to answer the question directly, so you can send a resume in. If you send it to hr@agentefficiency.com, you can just send that in. And then the question I will always ask people is, if you could design your favorite role or job to work at AE, what would that be? Because I only want to hire people who really love what they do. And if you could come join AE doing exactly what you want to do, and there's room and opportunity for that, then I will be very quickly on the go to hire you. So send a resume to hr@agentefficiency.com. Tell us what you want to do. What's your ideal role or job? And this could be, anything. It doesn't have to be like productivity content or courses or anything like that. Like if you're a really good accountant, right, and you want to be our accountant, I'm totally open for that. If you're a salesperson, you want to sell our products and services, hey, come talk to us. If you are a marketer, if you're working in customer service, like it could be any role, honestly. But if you love our company culture and how we do things, then just send us your resume, and we'll have a look at it and maybe have a chat about it. So hr@agentefficiency.com. So that's the way to do that, and to kind of share Brooks' story. So so the way Brooks came onto the team, this is a really funny story, is I first met Brooks back in, I want to say 2012.
That's
Um,
right.
2012 or 2013 at, I think, a Mac conference. Is that correct?
Yeah, Macworld, iWorld in San Francisco, the Smile Software Party, makers of Text Expander. That's where we met.
Okay, so I vaguely remember that party. It's such a long time ago, but I met Brooks there. I actually don't remember meeting him there, because I always thought we met at World Domination Summit, which is another conference, or maybe at the OmniFocus event. But we kind of stayed in touch, and Brooks at that time was running Document Snap, which is teach people how to go paperless. So he was kind of always in the same industry, and I always loved the blog posts that Brooks put out, because I learned a lot from him about, like, how to scan stuff, how to go paperless, and how to do all that sort of stuff in an automated way. And so I've always stayed in touch with Brooks. And one day I said, you know what? We need to have Brooks on the team, because what he does is just awesome. And if we work together, we can create amazing stuff. And so I kind of floated that idea like very early on. And Brooks said, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds good. So he always knew about it, but it was never, like a full game plan until much, much later, when I was actually up in Canada, and I said, I was in Banff, Alberta at the time. And me and Brooks were kind of like talking, and Brooks kind of said, oh, yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I said, okay, I'm actually in Banff, Alberta right now. It's about an hour and a half flight, I think. I can change my flight, and I can come visit you in Vancouver. I can meet your wife. I can meet your kids. I can take you out for a really nice dinner, and then convince you, to join, right? And so, as the employer, you have to oftentimes think about, especially as you're recruiting people, about who makes the final decision, right? And so, obviously, in a household, in a family, it's, the other partner is involved in that as well, right? So I wanted to make sure I showed up, and showed my good side, and talked to his wife, and made sure that she liked me, and that the kids liked me, right? So I showed up, not expecting at all that I was going to come, because I was, out in the mountains in nature, just relaxing, not expecting at all to visit Brooks. So, with the best clothing that I have, put myself together, changed my flight, went to Vancouver. I think I even stayed at your place. Is that correct?
You did, in my oldest son's room, surrounded by his Manchester United posters.
Yeah. So I think I stayed at your place for one night. And just wanted to leave a really good impression, to make sure that the wife was on board, because I knew at the end of the day she had to be on board if Brooks was going to join Agent Efficiency, right? And so wanted to show them a good time. And then also I was like, Brooks, I need to take you out for dinner. And I asked a couple friends, like, hey, where should I take this person? And they're like, hey, you need to take them to the sushi place. It's like a really nice place overlooking the waters. I'm like, okay, that's where we're gonna go. So I take Brooks there. And lo and behold, I find out that Brooks doesn't like sushi. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, this is like terrible. This is not the place to be. So, and I love sushi. So I'm just eating sushi. And then Brooks is like, oh, yeah, I'll just order the chicken. And so Brooks just ate chicken and rice at a really nice sushi place. But that was good enough to kind of seal the deal. And ever since then, Brooks joined the team in, was it 2016, I think?
2017, I believe. Early 2017, yeah. Yeah, and for the record, for those who know Vancouver, the restaurant was Miku, which is a very well-known sushi place here. My meal was fantastic, really good prawn or ebi stuff as well. So it was a total win. And Ten had a very smart strategy too. He bought some nice gifts to take back to his mom. And my wife, being a mom as well, of course, liked that. So she thought Tan was very nice. So buying a gift for the mom worked with my kid's mom as well. All right. So next question, and this is a question from again, this kind of a combo question came up a few times from Giacomo, who's also here live. So hey, Giacomo, and Jocelyn, who asked it on Instagram, and they ask, how do we organize our editorial calendar and content creation? Because we put out so much material every week. So how do we kind of organize that? This is definitely something that has evolved since I've joined the team. I don't know if you want me to take it, or you have some thoughts, Tan. What are your thoughts about the
Yeah,
editorial calendar?
I just say, Brooks, we need to have content every week. Can you just take care of this? And then it just happens.
Basically, the way that we do it. Speaking about the way we do it, it used to be kind of scattered is not the right word, but we used to have like a lot of stuff going on. What we decided to do maybe a year or two ago is be a lot more efficient, Asian efficient about how we do things. So now what we do is we look at what are kind of some big events or big things we want to be doing. So maybe we want to be talking about, well, work from home right now, or calendars at some point, or journaling. And we kind of put those flagpoles down when we're planning out our content. And then maybe we'll create some podcasts around those times. And then when we create the podcast, then usually we create blog posts on a similar theme, and maybe some newsletters as well. So we kind of we don't reuse content per se, but we kind of have themes around certain times, and then inevitably there'll be some holes. And what I do with that is I keep a list in Drafts, which is an app on my iPhone. And whenever I'm reading something, or sometimes ideas come to me when I'm out for a walk, whenever I have an idea for something we should have on the podcast or the blog, I just note it down. So I have this big running list of podcast topics or newsletter topics and that sort of thing. And then when we're filling holes, we just plug it in there. So doing all that and throwing out some guests, throwing in some guests. Yeah, that's basically how we do it.
Yeah, we also have a weekly meeting. As many of you know, our meeting day is on Wednesday. So that's our day when we have all of our meetings. And we have a weekly meeting there where we get together as a whole team and then kind of look at, some popular customer service tickets that we get, feedback from clients, whether it's like an NPS survey or like an email that people sent, or people posted something on social media, or there's an email that I got from someone. And then we'll post it in the weekly meeting notes as well, so we can all look at it together. And then a lot of content ideas come from that as well, because people might email in and say, hey, Tian, I noticed, that whenever I use GTD on a Windows computer, like I'm not as productive compared to on a Mac computer or something. What kind of tips do you have for that? And, it's one thing if something is brought up one time, but if you see something brought up multiple times, then usually a light bulb goes off with me or the rest of the team and say, hey, this seems to be a common theme or a reoccurrence of a challenge or a problem that people have. We should probably address this, right? And so if you've ever listened to the podcast or seen our blog post or read our email newsletter and you say to yourself, oh, wow, this is so timely, or hey, this is like the right thing at the right time for me right now, I'm happy to say that is not by accident. It is because we often look at feedback, we look at trends, we try to really be in tune of what's going on. We look at the Dojo forum all the time. We look at stuff going on Slack, which is all part of our Dojo community here. So if you're not a member, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/dojo. And we look at that stuff all the time to see what people are dealing with, right? So one of the early trends we noticed back in 2015 was more and more people started to use Microsoft devices, right? And in the beginning, when we started Asian Efficiency, it was very heavily Mac focused. But in the last 4 years, we've really tried to make a balance between Windows and Mac, because we saw the trend that people were using, Windows at work, Mac at home, have an Android phone or an Android tablet. The ecosystem went from Mac only to having Microsoft and Google products as well, right? So we want to address that. And so we start to notice all these different trends from just looking at all the feedback that we get. So whether it's a survey that you filled in to help us with that, or it's sending us an email, we look at that stuff every week, and then that's where we kind of see trends, and it helps us influence what we should talk about.
So speaking of Mac, the other thing I want to mention about the editorial calendar that has evolved is we used to generally plan things out maybe a sprint, or not one sprint, but a couple sprints in advance, what we were going to do, like maybe a month in advance. And then we changed it up that we would do it a quarter in advance. So that what would often happen is Tan and I would get together to do editorial planning. It would either be online, or sometimes I would even go down to Austin back in the old days when you could actually travel, and planned it out a quarter of a time. This last time we actually did an experiment, and we planned it out for about 6 months. We planned out the calendar. Now things change. Of course, sometimes we have different ideas. Obviously, the COVID thing shifted things up a lot, but it was really freeing having things planned that far in advance, because then you can really look ahead. So that has been a great change as well.
Yeah. As soon as we transitioned to 6 months, the world said, no, that's not going to work. The pandemic is here. You're going to go back to just doing weekly. I was like, oh, okay.
Turns out, yeah. All right. So you mentioned, this is actually a timely question, because you just mentioned about the trends towards and shifting how we're covering things. But a question from Rohini M was, what are some of our personal reasons? So he's detected correctly that we both use Macs primarily, but what are some of our personal reasons for choosing Mac over Windows? I actually have no idea what your history is, Tan. I'll speak to mine first. I was a super Windows power user. Like, I was a DOS command line person, editing config.sys and autoexec.bat. I was using Windows since version 3.0, super hardcore techie Windows person. Around 2005, when I started getting involved in more online content creation and productivity type stuff, what I found is a lot of the people that I talked to, and that what I would consider like really smart people in the space, I just noticed they are all using Macs. And that's something I try to do, is I try to pay attention to what are the quote unquote smart people in my industry. What do they do? And because there's probably a reason for it. So I noticed that they all tended to use Macs. So that was number one. And then number two, in 2005, my oldest son was born. And so I had one of those old school video cameras. And of course, like any good parent, I was like videotaping with their first child, videotaping like every single second of their life. And so I would try to import these movies into Windows Movie Maker, or whatever that tool was called at that time. And my computer kept crashing, and it kept crashing. And I just got so frustrated. I said, "That's it. I'm buying a Mac." So right away, I went out and I ordered a PowerBook G4, I think it was, and because they had great tools for working with video. And I've been a Mac user ever since. I do still keep my foot in the Windows world. I have a Surface Pro right behind me on the bookshelf, for those watching on video, that I oftentimes, when we're doing something on Windows, I'll reach back and grab it and fire it up. So I do kind of, I'm the Windows guy on the team, but yeah, my primary platform is Mac.
So I started back, was it Windows 3.1, I think it was called. It was like that white and kind of greenish look. And then I moved on to Windows 95. And then, you had NT 2000, and then you kind of went from there, right? So I was always a big Windows user myself growing up. And it was when I think it was, I don't know, 14 maybe, I started to move towards Linux. So I used Linux for a long time. I was on the Debian distribution. And then I had Red Hat for a while. For those who are listening, probably know that. And then I started to dive deeper into that. And then I was running FreeBSD. So I don't know if many people actually even know what that is, but that was the operating system I was running on because I was learning how to code. I was teaching myself how to code C language and assembly because I was really interested in like coding, and then like kind of like becoming like a hacker in a way, learning about computer security and software and that kind of stuff. And back then you had to use Linux and FreeBSD to kind of be part of the cool kids. And then we had like, those online channels and stuff, IRC, I think it's called at that time. So I taught myself how to code, and I was always like a big Windows user, and then transitioned into Linux and BSD. And then from there, it wasn't until 2008 when I got my first MacBook. Um, so that's when I started using it because I noticed a lot of my friends had them. And it was kind of like, honestly, it was the cool thing to have. It wasn't even because it was so much better. It was just like, this is a really expensive computer. All my cool friends, which were older than me and more successful than me, have it. And I was like, okay, this is just the next logical step. I just need to have this machine. So I bought it. And one of the things I first noticed that I liked a lot was that on the Mac, a lot of the productivity apps or a lot of the apps in general communicated with each other. Whether it was the default Apple apps that kind of communicated with each other, or just like, developed software by other companies or people, they would oftentimes integrate, right? So you would use something like a calendar with a to-do list or something, right? Whereas on Windows, that wasn't often the case at all. And then also the software on Linux or BSD was very limited in that sense. And so I went away from the mindset of like, I need to code everything myself and make my own software to, hey, I want to use other people's software. But if they can also integrate and talk to each other, that's like a win-win. That's a productivity win right there. And that's where I think Apple really, outdid the competition at that time. Now, I think nowadays that's very different, but that was kind of like the first reason for me to really love the Mac OS platform.
Yeah, I would even argue that right now, I think Microsoft is doing a lot more innovative stuff than Apple is. But that definitely wasn't the case back then. The one thing I also forgot about switching to the Mac is back then at that time, I was obsessed with the iPod. I was known as the iPod guy to such extent that one day my teammates at work, they all dressed up at me because I basically wore plaid shirt and khakis every single day. And so they all dressed up as me. They all spray painted their hair blonde, even though some of them were like of Indian descent and stuff like that. So they all spray painted their hair blonde, and they all made little fake iPods. So when I walked into a meeting, it said it's Brooks Duncan Day on the whiteboard, and they were all standing there looking at me, looking like me. I have a picture of it. It's pretty hilarious. But anyway, back at that time, there was this concept called the halo effect, that people found that people who were buying the iPod would then go on and buy a Mac or switch to a Mac. And I was definitely in that camp. I was so into the iPod that really did lead me to purchase. So I was definitely a halo effect person. All right. So next question, and this is from Bob P. And you kind of answered this when you talked about going through questions and feedback, but question from Bob P is, how do we decide what kind of products we develop and how long it would take to bring to market? So recently we did an automation academy, and we've done other products recently. Like what makes us decide to do those products and devote the time to creating them?
Yeah, one of the things I've always talked about in our newsletters and on the blog, and not so much on the podcast, but definitely in the newsletters and on the blog, is that we are a customer-driven company. And so what that means is that we're always looking at feedback. We're always looking at what people need help with. And then we tend to develop products based on those needs. So I think we are very different compared to people in our industry or people who develop productivity courses and stuff, is that oftentimes they create stuff that they like, right? They scratch their own itch, like, hey, I developed my own Evernote workflow, or I did this and did that, and that kind of helped me. And then they start to create a product or a course around that and then release it. And then people just kind of buy and pick and choose, if they need help with that. But that's never the approach that we took. If you bought any of our courses, you will always see that the system that we teach, the programs that we created was never really based on one person. It's really based on what we've seen work for a lot of people, a lot of our clients, but also on the needs that people have, right? And so it was really that transition from, hey, we need to focus on our clients and customers and what do they need help with, where we really put our emphasis on. And so that's why we look at feedback all the time and say, hey, this is a common problem that people are having. We need to create material around this so that we can help those people, right? And so that's kind of like how we really develop products. And you'll see this too, where, for example, right now we're developing a new course. And by the time this episode is live, this course is already live, called Productive at Home, where we help people become more productive working from home. And it's a challenge that a lot of people are having. And, I've been working from home since 2009. I could have released this course many, many years ago if I wanted to, but this is the time and place when people need it, because now it's mostly relevant, right? People are now working from home, struggling to be focused and get stuff done. And we see a lot of that. And that's why we're developing this course, right? And so it's all about timing. It's all about, meeting the customer needs, and figuring out what the feedback is there to look at and kind of like dive deeper. And then usually it takes us about 6 to 9 months to really go from this is an idea to launching it, because there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of material that needs to be created. So it takes about 6 to 9 months to really launch a course. And there's a lot of like manpower, hours, thousands of dollars that go into research, testing, validating stuff, because we want to make sure that it really works for the majority of people, right? It cannot just work for one type of person. It should work for people who have like a Windows computer at work and a Mac at home, right? Or to have a Android tablets and an iPhone and that kind of stuff. And so as Asian efficiency has grown and matured, we noticed, for example, that in the beginning, it was like 90% male, and now it's like 50-50, right? And also in the beginning, a lot of people who followed us had like, a solo career, and now most people who follow us are family men and women. And so we need to adjust, how we create products and how we solve their problems, because obviously you can tell someone, hey, you just need to do X, Y, and Z. But if you have a kid at home or a young kid, or you have to take care of your parents, that's a different type of situation versus somebody who's, fresh out of college, right? And is trying to figure stuff out. And so we look at everything, and it takes about 6 to 9 months to really launch and create something.
All right, I have a two-part question from Chris O. Two very different questions. One submitted live and one submitted pre-submitted. So I'll do the live question first. And Chris asked another question, which I knew would come up at some point, which is there something specific about "quote unquote" Asian efficiency? Like, what's the deal with the Asian part of the Asian efficiency?
Yeah, so again, Asian efficiency started back in 2011, and it started off as a passion project. So it was never meant to be a business. It was always like a joke. And I don't know if the story has actually ever been told, but basically, what ended up happening was Aaron and I were at a house with a bunch of other people who were launching businesses at that time, and people had passion projects. And we said, hey, let's all hang out together and create stuff, right? So we're all in the same home. And then we went out for one night, and then the next day, Aaron and I were working on stuff, and we were being productive, working on our own passion projects. And then some other guy walked up, this Caucasian dude, and was like, wow, how do you guys get stuff done right now? And it's noon. You guys are already done with your work. Yeah, I'm about to get started. Like, how do you guys do this? This is like Asian efficiency right here. And we thought it was so funny that we just registered the domain name asianefficiency.com. And a year later, when we decided to blog about it, that's when we'd actually turned it into a blog and a passion project. So that's kind of like how it started. Then also, if you live in the United States or in a Western country, typically Asian people have like a positive stereotype that they are efficient. So we kind of played on that as well. And then also we have found it to be very catchy. When you tell people, hey, I run Asian efficiency, and I'm sure, Brooks, when you tell people that you work for Asian efficiency, people do a double take. You say, what?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny in Vancouver, which is a city of very high percentage of people with Asian descent, including my wife. People, I think, do the double take, but then they kind of laugh because they get it for all of the connotations that you said. But we've had other people who are just like, what on earth are you talking about? So yeah, it's definitely different. It's definitely a conversation starter. I'll say that. All right, so the next question from Chris O, also pre-submitted. He asks, what are your audio and video setups and tools? Question number one. And question number two is, how do you speak into the camera naturally when you're trying to look at your notes? So for myself, I'll start with myself. So tool-wise, I I'm looking forward at a monitor, not at my MacBook screen. So I bought an external camera. So it's a Logitech C920 camera. I've heard that the Logitech Brio, Brio, is better, but I've never used it myself. I tried to buy it not too long ago, but I guess because everyone's working from home, it's totally sold out. But I've heard that one is very good. Audio wise, I use a mic called a Heil PR40, which is quite an expensive microphone. You definitely can get by, depending on what you're doing, you can definitely get by with a less expensive microphone. I have a one called an Audio Technica ATR 2500, I believe, that I use when I'm not at my desk. So I'll drop a link to that in the show notes, theproductivityshow.com/300. We record our podcast live on Zoom, and then I use Audio Hijack Pro, which is a Mac app, to record the audio. Regarding the question Chris asked about how do you look forward and without looking at your notes, I'm actually not great at that. Right now, I have my Zoom window on the left of my monitor and my notes in a Google Doc on the right. However, I'm looking straight at the camera, so I can't actually see my notes. Just this morning, I was playing around with an app called Prompt Smart Pro, which is an iOS app. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to put your script, if you're recording a script, on your iOS device, and then you can kind of position it using a clamp or something right above or behind your camera, and then it listens for your voice, and it transcribes the text, so it can detect when you're actually reading the script, and it will move the script with your voice. And I was playing around with it this morning. It's pretty cool, actually. So definitely, if you're an iOS user, check that out, Prompt Smart Pro. How about you, Tan? What gear are you using for audio video?
Yeah, I've loved the same gear. So the camera, I actually have an external camera that I'm using for the first time today. And it is the Logitech Brio that you mentioned, the 4K camera. And I actually had it for 4 months. I just never used it. And it was laying down somewhere in my room in a box. And I said, you know what? I should just bust it out and actually use it. So today was the first time I used it and liking it so far, and it's working great. So loving that. Also have the same mic, the Heil PR40. And then the tools that you mentioned, we use that. And then as far as like looking at notes and stuff, I have used like a display app like that, the Prompt Smart Pro, or any other variation where it can listen to your voice and then it will keep scrolling. So when we were filming the productivity blueprints, which was many years ago, that's kind of like how we did it with an iPad that kind of like mirrored, and then it would show behind the camera. So if you look closely in the productivity blueprint, you'll catch that. But in most of the other courses, it's kind of like a bullet points, and then I'm just usually speaking from the heart with a few points to make sure that we communicate that. And as far as like the podcast goes, when I'm looking at the camera or the screen, I'm actually looking at the notes. So before I speak, oftentimes when Brooks is speaking, I know kind of like when to go next, and so I know what to say, and then it comes off natural. But when it comes to the Zoom meeting, I actually have it on my right. So when I look this way, I see everyone else. But that's a really simple setup, nothing too fancy or crazy. And also the same mic that you mentioned, Brooks, for the ATR 2500, I think it's called. That's the one we use when we record locally. So whenever a guest over or whenever you come to Austin, that's the mic that we use with all of that stuff.
All right, question from Eric, who submitted this live in the chat. What do you think will change about the podcast and the dojo in the next few years? For me, from my perspective, dojo-wise, I've been really excited about the change that we've recently made. We call it internally, we call it Dojo 2.0, where we've really started focusing on implementation and execution. So we have these monthly calls called DTDT, we call internally, or do the damn thing. So I think more focus on education more focus on implementation and execution, and helping our audience really complete these things that they need to get done. I think that everything we do, my guess is going to kind of move more in that direction versus just information, because we can all read books and listen to podcasts and read articles, and get all this information, but it doesn't really help if we don't actually do the damn thing, as we say. How about you, Tan? What are your thoughts on the plan? What you think will change about the podcast and the dojo in the next few years?
Yeah, with Dojo 2.0, as we just relaunched it, it's really focused on implementation and execution. So it's just the idea that honestly, if you've been studying productivity for a while, you probably don't need more information. You probably know most of the things already that you need to know. But most of us are just not implementing enough. And if you can implement some of the things you learn about, that's where you will actually see most of the success and the things that you will benefit from. And so we want to help people become better at implementing and actually taking action. And so, yes, we will continue to create courses and the dojo will continue to put out great information. But the big focus every month going forward now is do the damn thing, right? And that's the monthly call that we have where we come together on a live call. We will tackle a very specific topic where we do very minimal teaching, but actually walk you through a step-by-step process to implement something. So we did one on planning your perfect week, right? You've probably listened to the podcast episode on how to plan your perfect week. You might have even read a few blog posts or newsletters from us, but how many of you actually implemented it, right? And if I had to guess, very few people. And so we had a lot of people show up live for the planning your perfect week call on Do the Damn Thing. And people just walked away by the end of the hour having implemented that exact thing. They planned their upcoming week with the process that we sort of created ourselves, that we use ourselves, and now they've been able to use it and implement it going forward. And it just took some hand holding, some guidance over 1 hour to be able to actually implement it. And then also if they had questions, they could ask us live so that we can then help them on the spot, right? And so I think that's going to grow even bigger as we are rolling out those trainings, where I think over the next few years, like the implementation side of things is way more important than the information. And so where the podcast kind of falls into this whole picture is the podcast is a great medium to share a lot of valuable information, to educate and to teach, but then to transition into actually executing. That's where I think the dojo is really helpful for you to be able to take, some of the things you learned in the podcast episode, but then also have our coaching and guidance and accountability as well in the dojo to actually implement it.
All right, we have two more questions that we will answer live. Though, if you are listening to this podcast, if you're live in the chat, we will, after recording, we will stay around and answer any other questions that you might have. One thing I do want to mention about that, in case we didn't make it clear, is that we actually do this, what we're doing right now, recording the podcast live every single week with our dojo audience. So we just mentioned the dojo 2.0. We actually do this every week with the dojo audience and answer questions as we record, and also we hang out after recording as well. So the people who are live on this call right now, you'll kind of get a sense of what's that like every week. So question number one is asked live from Giacomo again. And what he asks is, how do we test, if we have a new product, how do we test the business plan for that? Like how do we estimate what we're going to spend for marketing and if it's worth it, and advertising? Like, say we have an idea for a course, how do we actually test to make sure it's going to be a good idea?
Yeah, this is I could go on and on and on and on, but the short answer is every time we launch a new product, we honestly are always surprised by how well some do and how terrible others are at. Some products totally stink. Some products do extremely well. And after doing this for almost 10 years, it's still very hard to predict which one is going to be a winner and which ones are not, right? But there are some early signs that we can look at, right? Because one of the most expensive mistakes that you can make when you're running a business is launching a product, building it for so many years, and then putting it out there, and then no one ends up buying it, right? And then you end up wasting all this time. So that's one of the reasons we like Scrum so much, is because it's an iterative process, because you can just go sprint by sprint. So every 2 weeks you kind of check in and you start to develop stuff for people. And so in an ideal world, you would work with your prospects or your clients that need a specific product or need a specific solution. You help build it with them. And then once the solution kind of works, then you kind of like package it up and then sell it, right? And so oftentimes we will work with a small group of clients first to kind of solve a problem that they have that we kind of identified based on the feedback and stuff like that, and then kind of see if there's potential there. And so there's a lot of feedback that we look at working with small groups of clients. And also you just have to look at trends overall, because right now, for example, with the pandemic, a lot of people are now working from home for the first time. So that's a big trend that we want to, like focus on, because a lot of people are dealing with this, and we see this in the feedback as well, right? And as far as like marketing budgets and how much time we spend, every product is always a little different, but typically we just know from past experience that it takes at least like 6 months to put a really solid course together. We've done it before where we did it in one quarter in 3 months, and usually by that time everyone hates their lives by the end of the quarter and just wants to do nothing else. You can ask Brooks about this. He was able to create a whole course in one quarter, and he was absolutely toasted by the end of it.
Yeah, that was an experience, but thankfully for me, it was something I loved doing, the content. So that part was no problem. But yeah, it was definitely an experience.
But when it comes to budgets for advertising and stuff, it's honestly just an experience thing where the budget usually grows every product, and we just kind of learn from, okay, we spent this much on advertising, we spent this much on this and that, and we're going to look at it at every single product launch and then say, hey, was this smart? Was this not smart? So it's a really iterative process. And since we've been doing it for almost 10 years now, we kind of have a dial in where we know it takes about 6 months to launch it. We know it takes several $1,000s to create this. It takes several $1,000s to do this and that, right? We know that if it takes 6 months, then obviously a certain percentage of our payroll is dedicated towards that. So it costs, tens of thousands of dollars to put a certain product together. So we need to make sure we set that aside and so on. So honestly, it just comes from experience. And I had no budget whatsoever when we launched our first product. It actually totally flopped, for those who don't know. Totally flopped when we launched our first product. It was called Better Sleep. It's something we still offer today. But when we launched it, I think we made $400, $600 maybe. And that was definitely not enough to make a full-time living. And it wasn't until we went to make OmniFocus Premium Post, which is now discontinued, but it was the product that really, launched Asian efficiency. And it was because we were working with clients. We kind of took the lean startup approach. So if you look that up, that's been very influential in how we build products, which Scrum was kind of built out of, is a natural extension of that as well.
All right. So final question for the live recording of the podcast, which is, and this is from Gaso G, and I apologize. I almost for sure massacred the pronunciation, so apologies for that. So the question is, what is your main goal for the next 3 years? So where do you want to see the Asian efficiency team? So I don't know how you want to take this, a personal goal, professional goal, Tan. For me personally, my goal is I would like to shift towards having my family, be able to travel more and temporary relocate. So that in some ways, this quarantine situation has been a godsend for that part. Not that I want to take my kids out of school, we wouldn't do that, but maybe in the summer months to be able to say, work from the Yukon for a month, or some lake in Guatemala, or go hang out with the rest of the AE team in the Philippines. Like having that flexibility built in to our family is somewhere I want to get to. So this quarantine has kind of shown my family that we are able to do things not in the office. So it's just like lining things up. Technology-wise, financial-wise, workflow-wise, internal workflow-wise, to be able to do that. So that's kind of where I'm looking to be in 3 years. How about you, Tan? What's your goal for the next 3 years, and where do you want to see the Asian efficiency team?
Yeah, that's good to know, Brooks. That will help me kind of develop processes in place so that you can actually do that. So I'll make sure to help you with your goal. As far as like my personal goal, yeah, I really like to travel more. Something that, if you've been following us for a while, you know that I love to travel. So I have a few places and countries I really want to go to, like South Africa is big on the list, New Zealand. I really want to explore Africa as a continent more. and also South America as well. So those are some major things. As far as like Asian efficiency goes, I think there's going to be a big thing for us in the next 3 years when it comes to offline, meaning in-person workshops, in-person training, in-person coaching. As we are going more online, I think there's a bigger need for having offline or in-person training as well. And one of the things I would love to do at some point is a conference as well, having some sort of industry standard or industry conference where all of us come together, kind of hang out in person and share ideas. And it doesn't really exist right now. So that's the thing we really want to build over time as well, is to have kind of like that offline presence as well, where imagine you can meet us in person, you can meet fellow people who are interested in productivity or project management or Scrum, and hang out in person and kind of share ideas of what's working for you and what's working in their company, and kind of like learn from them that way and kind of like share best practices. So there's going to be a big offline push that you're probably going to see from us over the next few years. And then, from a business point of view, it kind of like all comes together, right? So there's an online presence, there's an offline presence, but there's no offline presence right now in terms of what we have. And if we take the bigger picture, I haven't even shared this internally, but the bigger picture really is that, this is something I envisioned a long time ago, and we're slowly chipping away at it. But imagine if you could put on your resume that you had Asian efficiency training, right? That you went through a specific Asian efficiency course or some AE training. And because you have that certificate or program on your resume, you are seen as more efficient. You are seen as somebody who is a leader. You're seen as X, Y, and Z. And so your status like elevates because you did this training or program with AE. So that's ideally what we want to get towards. Now, that's going to be like a 25-year vision that we're working towards, but that's ideally where I would like to be, right? Because right now, for example, if you say, hey, I did the Cisco certification, people are like, oh, yeah, he knows about X, Y, and Z, right? But there's no such thing right now for productivity. But everyone that's hiring is always looking for people to be productive, right? People will say, hey, I want you to be really good at multitasking, which, as many of you know, is a terrible idea. But what they're really saying is, I want to hire productive people. I want to make sure that you know how to manage your email, how to manage your calendar, that you show up on time, run meetings efficiently, yada, 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 right? So that doesn't really exist right now. There's a lot of like executive training, leadership training, and stuff like that, but nothing specifically around productivity. So imagine if you had a productivity certificate that said, hey, I'm certified productive, right? You would be able to demand a higher salary. You would probably be in a more senior position. You would be X, Y, and Z, right? So it's kind of like the bigger picture we want to go towards.
All right. So thank you very much for everybody. I'm looking forward to someday working on my AE certification. Really appreciate you being, for those of you who are live, really appreciate you being live here asking questions. Also appreciate those of you who have some pre-submitted questions. This is a lot of fun to do. Looking forward to the next 300 episodes, TPS 600 someday. As far as action items go, we always like to end each episode with action items. So in this case, what I would recommend, first of all, is to go to theproductivityshow.com/300, which is the show notes. And as I mentioned, there were a number of questions that were pre-submitted that were answered in other podcast episodes that we've done. So I can see some examples here. How do you make others more efficient? How do you adapt an exercise room at home? Exercise routine, I should say. What do you do when you get bored working on a project? How do you overcome mental tiredness? Any tips on working at home for people who aren't used to it? It's like a bunch of these questions, which we have free articles and blog posts about that. So I'm gonna collect all those, put them in the show notes with links to the resources where we talk about exactly those topics. So I recommend checking that out. And also, if you would like to participate in this Q&A and ask questions of us every single week, you can do that in the dojo. So just go to theproductivityshow.com/dojo and you can give it a try. Really, really appreciate you listening and have a great week.